What happens when a royal guest walks onto one of America's most beloved morning shows and turns a friendly interview into an absolute nightmare? In just 39 seconds, one comment would shatter the polite facade and expose an attitude so entitled, so shocking, that producers had no choice but to pull the plug on live television. Before we get into what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts on what you're about to hear. Trust me, you're going to have opinions. It started like any other Tuesday morning at Good Morning America. The studio was buzzing with its usual energy, crew members rushing around making final checks, cameras getting into position, and the audience settling into their seats with their morning coffee. Lara Spencer, the show's co-anchor known for her warm personality and quick wit, was preparing for what was supposed to be a lighthearted interview. The guest? Prince Harry, who was scheduled to discuss his latest charitable initiative. It was meant to be easy, breezy, and positive. The kind of segment that makes viewers smile before they head off to work. Lara had done her homework. She always did. Her notes were thorough, her questions were thoughtful, and she had planned several moments where she could showcase the prince's humanitarian work. The producers were excited. Royal interviews always brought in great ratings, and this one seemed like it would be particularly pleasant. After all, the prince had been doing the media rounds, and most of his appearances had gone smoothly. There was no reason to think this would be any different, but from the moment Prince Harry walked onto that set, something felt off. His body language was stiff, his smile seemed forced, and there was a coldness in his eyes that the cameras picked up immediately. Lara, ever the professional, greeted him with genuine warmth. She stood up, extended her hand, and welcomed him with that trademark smile that had made her a household name. The audience applauded politely, excited to see a real prince in person. Lara gestured to the chair across from her. "Come on in, have a seat. We're so glad to have you here this morning." Prince Harry sat down without much acknowledgement. He adjusted his jacket, looked around the studio with what seemed like disapproval, and then finally settled his gaze on Lara. His expression was blank, almost bored. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the charming prince they'd seen in other interviews. This was someone who looked like he didn't want to be there. Lara jumped right in, trying to warm things up. "So, let's talk about your new initiative. You've been working with organizations that focus on mental health support for young people. That's such important work. What inspired you to get involved with this particular cause?" Prince Harry leaned back in his chair, taking his time before responding. His tone was flat, almost condescending. "Well, Lara, I think that's fairly obvious, isn't it? Mental health is something that affects everyone, though I suppose not everyone has the platform or the understanding to actually do something meaningful about it." The comment hung in the air for a moment. Lara's smile faltered just slightly, but she recovered quickly. She was a pro after all. She'd dealt with difficult guests before. "Absolutely, having a platform is important, and I think our viewers would love to hear more about the specific programs you're supporting. Can you tell us about some of the young people you've met through this work?" Prince Harry waved his hand dismissively. "I've met countless young people, too many to single out specific stories for. Entertainment purposes." Entertainment purposes. The words came out with such disdain that even the crew members exchanged glances. This wasn't how guests talked on Good Morning America. This wasn't how guests talked to Lara Spencer. The audience was silent now. The excitement from earlier completely evaporated. Lara maintained her composure, though viewers at home could see the slight tightening around her eyes. "Well, I wouldn't call sharing inspiring stories entertainment. I think our audience genuinely cares about these issues. Many of them are parents, teachers, and young people themselves who are looking for hope and solutions." Prince Harry let out a small laugh that sounded more like a scoff. "Of course they care. Everyone cares until it requires actual sacrifice or understanding. That's the problem with morning television, isn't it? Everything gets reduced to feel-good moments and applause breaks. Real change requires more than watching a segment while you're eating your cereal." The tension in the studio was now impossible to ignore. Audience members looked at each other in disbelief. The crew behind the cameras stood frozen, unsure if they should intervene. Lara's co-anchors, watching from the news desk, wore expressions of shock. This was spiraling fast, but Lara didn't back down. Her voice remained steady, professional, but there was steel underneath now. "I think you might be underestimating our audience. Many of the people watching have made real sacrifices in their own communities. They volunteer, they donate, they show up for their neighbors. Morning television might not be as glamorous as some platforms, but it reaches millions of people who genuinely want to make a difference." Prince Harry's expression darkened. Volunteering at a local bake sale isn't quite the same as the work I'm doing, is it? I'm talking about systemic change, about working with global organizations, about using real influence, not this. He gestured vaguely around the studio, and that gesture said everything. The contempt was clear. He thought he was above this, above the show, above the audience, above Lara herself. Lara's jaw tightened. The warmth that usually radiated from her was gone, replaced by something sharper. I'm sorry, this show has raised millions of dollars for charities. We've brought attention to causes that desperately needed it. We've given voices to people who otherwise wouldn't be heard. So when you say this like it's beneath you, you're not just insulting me or the show. You're insulting every person who's ever watched and been inspired to do something good. The audience actually started clapping at that. Not the polite applause from earlier, but genuine supportive applause for Lara. They could see what was happening. They could see a beloved host being disrespected by someone who clearly thought he was too important for the room he was in. Prince Harry looked genuinely surprised by the applause, as if he couldn't fathom why people weren't on his side. He shifted in his seat, his face reddening slightly. I didn't come here to be lectured by a morning show host about the value of charity work, and I didn't invite you here to be insulted in front of my audience. Lara shot back. Her voice was still controlled, but the message was clear. She wasn't going to let this continue. Look, we prepared thoughtful questions about your work. We were excited to help spread your message. But if you can't show basic respect for the people in this room, then perhaps this interview isn't going to work out. It was a bold move. Hosts rarely called out their guests so directly on live television. But Lara had had enough, and frankly, so had everyone watching. The prince wasn't just being rude, he was being arrogant, dismissive, and completely tone-deaf. Prince Harry's face was now fully flushed. His composure, which had been cold and distant, was cracking. Respect? You want to talk to me about respect? Do you have any idea who I am, what I've been through, the scrutiny I face every single day? We all face challenges, Lara responded calmly. Some of us just don't use them as an excuse to look down on other people. That was it. That was the line that broke everything. Prince Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The microphone pack attached to his belt swung awkwardly as he moved. This is absurd. I don't have to sit here and be spoken to like this by someone who reads off a teleprompter for a living. The gasp from the audience was audible. Reading off a teleprompter for a living. It was such a nakedly dismissive thing to say. Such a clear attempt to diminish Lara's career, her talent, everything she'd worked for. And it revealed exactly who this person was. Someone so used to deference and special treatment that basic accountability felt like an attack. Lara stood up as well, maintaining her dignity even as her guest fell apart. I think we're done here. Thank you for coming. Her voice was steady, final. There was no anger in it, just a clear boundary being set. The producers in the control room were already signaling to cut to commercial. The crew was moving in, but Prince Harry wasn't finished. Done? We're done when I say we're done. Do you understand that? I agreed to come on this show as a favor to you and your little program. And this is how I'm treated? It wasn't a favor, Lara said quietly but firmly. You were invited because we thought you had something valuable to share. Clearly, we were wrong. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of this meltdown. Viewers at home were watching in real time as a prince, someone born into ultimate privilege, completely unraveled because he wasn't being treated like royalty, because someone had the audacity to push back against his rudeness. Security was now approaching the set, not in an aggressive way, but making their presence known. The segment producer was speaking urgently into her headset. Lara's co-anchors had stood up from the news desk, ready to step in if needed. This had gone from an awkward interview to a genuine incident. You're making a huge mistake, Prince Harry said, pointing his finger at Lara. A huge mistake. Do you know what kind of attention this is going to bring? Do you know who will be calling about this? The only mistake made here, Lara responded, was assuming you'd be a gracious guest. I've interviewed hundreds of people on this show. Presidents, actors, athletes, authors, activists. And not one of them has ever spoken to me or this audience with such contempt. Not one. The audience erupted in applause again, louder this time, standing up to support Lara. It was an extraordinary moment. A live studio audience, on their feet, defending their host against someone who thought his title made him untouchable. Prince Harry looked around at the applauding crowd with genuine confusion, as if he couldn't process what was happening. In his world, people didn't clap against him. People didn't stand up to him. And certainly, Morning show host didn't shut down his behavior on live television. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, though the microphone still picked it up. "Absolutely unbelievable." "What's unbelievable?" Lara said, her voice cutting through the applause, "is that you came here expecting to promote your charitable work while showing zero charity toward anyone else. You want to talk about mental health and kindness, but you can't even be kind for 20 minutes on a morning show." That comment landed hard, because it was true. The irony was impossible to miss. Here was someone advocating for compassion and understanding, while displaying none of it himself. The disconnect was staggering. "I don't need to listen to this," Prince Harry said, yanking off his microphone pack without waiting for the sound technician. He pulled the wire roughly, nearly breaking the equipment in the process. Another display of disregard, this time for the crew members who were just doing their jobs. "Then don't," Lara said simply. "The door's right there." And that was it. That was the moment. The 39-second exchange that would end the interview and make headlines everywhere. From the first dismissive comment to the final standoff, barely more than half a minute of pure, unfiltered tension that exposed everything wrong with entitled behavior. Prince Harry stormed off the set, his face red, his posture rigid with anger. Producers and assistants scrambled after him, trying to manage the situation, but he wasn't interested in being managed. He wanted out, and he wanted everyone to know how offended he was. Lara stood there for a moment, watching him go, then turned back to the audience with a slight shake of her head. The studio was completely silent, except for the sound of the prince's footsteps echoing as he disappeared backstage. Every eye was on Lara, waiting to see what she would do next. This was uncharted territory. Guests didn't just storm off Good Morning America, and when they did get upset, it certainly wasn't because the host had called them out for being rude. This was different. This was a moment that would define how people saw both of them. Lara took a breath, smoothed down her blazer, and turned to face the cameras with remarkable composure. "Well," she said, her voice surprisingly light despite what had just happened, "that was certainly not how we planned to start the morning." She looked at the audience, and a small, genuine smile appeared on her face. "I think we all need a minute to process what just happened here." The audience laughed, a release of all that built up tension. It was nervous laughter at first, but then it grew warmer, more supportive. They were with her, completely with her. One woman in the front row actually started another round of applause, and soon the entire studio was clapping again, this time not in defiance of the guest, but in pure support of their host. Lara held up her hands, genuinely touched. "Thank you. Really, thank you. But let me say something important here." She paused, gathering her thoughts, making sure she said this right. "We invited a guest onto our show this morning to talk about mental health and charity work. Those are topics I care deeply about. Topics we all should care about, and I'm genuinely disappointed that we couldn't have that conversation." Her tone was measured, thoughtful. There was no gloating, no victory lap, just honest disappointment. "But what I'm not going to do, what I will never do on this show, is sit quietly while someone disrespects you." She gestured to the audience. "Because you are why we're here. You wake up early, you tune in, you engage with what we do, and you deserve better than to watch someone treat this space, treat all of us, like we're beneath them." Another wave of applause. Lara was threading a difficult needle here, and she was doing it beautifully. She wasn't attacking the prince personally. She wasn't making it about his title or his background. She was making it about behavior, about respect, about basic human decency. And that resonated. The floor director was signaling frantically, trying to get her attention. They needed to go to commercial, needed to regroup, needed to figure out what to do with the rest of the show now that their major segment had imploded. But Lara held up one finger, asking for just a moment more. She wasn't done yet. "I've been doing this job for a long time," she continued, "and I've learned that it doesn't matter what title someone has, how much money they have, or how famous they are. What matters is how they treat people, how they treat the crew members adjusting their microphones, the producers coordinating their schedules, the audience members who took time out of their day to be here. That's what tells you who someone really is." The camera pushed in slightly, capturing the sincerity in her expression. Lara wasn't performing now. She was speaking from the heart, and everyone could feel it. So if speaking up about that means losing a guest, then so be it. I can live with that. What I couldn't live with is staying silent and letting disrespect become acceptable. Not on this show, not on my watch. The applause this time was thunderous. People weren't just clapping, they were cheering. The crew members, who normally remain neutral and professional, were nodding in agreement. Even the camera operators, usually invisible behind their equipment, were smiling. Lara had just articulated something that everyone in that room, and likely everyone watching at home, was feeling. Enough is enough. Okay, Lara said, her smile returning fully now. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to pivot to something much more positive. We've got an incredible teacher from Ohio who started a program providing free meals to students in need. Now that's the kind of story worth our time. The studio cut to commercial, and the moment the red lights on the cameras went dark, the place erupted. Audience members were on their feet, calling out support to Lara. The crew was buzzing with energy, replaying what had just happened, already knowing this would be the talk of the industry for weeks. And Lara, finally allowing herself to drop the professional mask for just a second, let out a long exhale. Her co-anchor Robin rushed over from the news desk. "Are you okay? That was intense." "I'm fine," Lara said, though her hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was catching up with her. "Did that really just happen?" "Oh, it happened," Robin confirmed. "And it was incredible. You handled that perfectly. I mean it, perfectly." The executive producer appeared, headset askew, tablet in hand, looking both stressed and oddly proud. "Lara, that was, I don't even know what to say. We're getting flooded with calls, messages, social media is exploding. People are going crazy over this." "Good crazy or bad crazy?" Lara asked, though part of her didn't really care. She'd done what felt right in the moment, and she'd stand by it regardless of the reaction. "Good crazy. Very good crazy. People are praising you for standing your ground. They're saying it's about time someone called out entitled behavior like that." The producer scrolled through his tablet, reading off comments. "Listen to this. Finally, a host with a backbone. That's what real journalism looks like. Lara Spencer is a class act." It goes on and on. Lara felt a wave of relief wash over her, not because she needed validation, but because it confirmed what she'd felt in her gut. The audience, the real audience watching at home, understood what had happened. They saw through the title and the status to the behavior underneath. And they supported her for not tolerating it. "What about him?" Lara asked. "Where did he go?" "Last I heard, he was in his dressing room making phone calls," the producer said. "His people are trying to do damage control, but honestly, I don't know what they can say. It's all on tape. Every word, every expression, every dismissive gesture. There's no spinning that." Robin shook her head in disbelief. "I still can't believe he said that thing about you reading off a teleprompter. Like that's somehow an insult? We all work with teleprompters. That's television. And besides, you ad-lib half your segments anyway." "It wasn't really about the teleprompter," Lara said quietly. "It was about finding something, anything, to diminish what I do, to make himself feel superior. That's what people do when they're challenged and don't have a real response. They attack your credibility, your profession, your worth." The wisdom in that observation silenced the small group around her. Because Lara was right. The prince's comments weren't really about morning television or teleprompters or any of the surface-level things he'd mentioned. They were about his inability to handle being treated like everyone else. His inability to accept that his title didn't grant him immunity from basic social expectations. "We're back in 30 seconds, the floor director called out. Lara straightened up, checked her appearance in the monitor, and took her position back at the interview set. The audience, who had been chatting excitedly during the break, quieted down as the cameras prepared to go live again. You could feel the energy in the room. Everyone was still riding the high of what had just transpired. The red light came on. "Welcome back," Lara said smoothly, as if the last 15 minutes hadn't been complete chaos. "Well, that was unexpected. But you know what? Sometimes unexpected moments teach us the most valuable lessons. And the lesson here is simple. Kindness matters. Respect matters. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Treating people with basic decency should never be optional." She let that sit for a moment, then shifted gears entirely. "Now, let's talk about someone who embodies those values every single day." Her name is Patricia Cole, and she's a third-grade teacher in Cincinnati who noticed that some of her students were coming to school hungry. So she did something about it. The show continued, moving into the feel-good story about the teacher, then into cooking segments, then into the news updates. Everything proceeded normally, professionally, exactly as it always did. But everyone knew that the real story of the day had already happened. The real story was in those 39 seconds when a host stood up for herself, her show, and her audience against someone who thought he was untouchable. Backstage, however, things were far from normal. Prince Harry's dressing room had become command central for a crisis management operation. His publicist was on the phone with what sounded like a very unhappy supervisor. His assistant was pacing back and forth, laptop open, monitoring the social media response in real time, and the prince himself was sitting in the makeup chair, still fuming, still not quite grasping that he was the villain in this story. "This is ridiculous," he kept saying. "Absolutely ridiculous. She ambushed me. That's what happened. She set me up to make me look bad." His publicist covered the phone's mouthpiece. "Sir, with all due respect, she asked you standard interview questions. You're the one who," the publicist paused, choosing words carefully, "escalated things." "Escalated?" "I responded to her disrespect. She questioned my work, my impact, my importance." The assistant looked up from the laptop, face pale. "Sir, you might want to see this. The video clip is already circulating, and the comments? They're not good." "Let me see that," the prince demanded, grabbing the laptop. He scrolled through the comments, his expression growing darker with each one. These people don't understand. They don't know what it's like to have every word scrutinized, every action judged. But that was exactly the problem. He was being judged, and he couldn't handle it. He'd spent his entire life insulated from real consequences, surrounded by people who agreed with him, validated him, protected him. And the moment someone pushed back, even politely at first, he'd crumbled, not into apologetic humility, but into defensive arrogance. His publicist ended the phone call and turned to face him directly. "We need to release a statement, something that acknowledges the tension and moves us past this quickly." "A statement saying what? That I'm sorry? I'm not apologizing for speaking the truth." "The truth?" His assistant looked incredulous, but quickly caught themselves. "Sir, the truth is that you insulted a beloved television host on her own show in front of a live audience. The truth is that it's all on video. The truth is that people are not on your side here." That seemed to actually penetrate. Prince Harry looked at the laptop again, really reading the comments this time. They weren't just critical, they were brutal. People were calling him entitled, rude, out of touch, arrogant. They were praising Lara for her professionalism and her backbone. They were saying they'd never support his charitable work after seeing how he treated people. The court of public opinion had convened, deliberated, and reached a verdict. And it was not in his favor. "This can't be happening," he said quietly. But it was happening, and unlike many moments in his carefully managed life, this one couldn't be controlled, couldn't be spun, couldn't be erased. The internet had already done its work, capturing, sharing, and commenting on every second of the confrontation. Clips were being replayed, reaction videos were being filmed, think pieces were being written. The story had taken on a life of its own, and there was no putting it back in the box. His publicist sat down across from him, forcing eye contact. "Listen to me very carefully. We have two options here. Option 1. You release a statement apologizing for losing your temper and acknowledging that your comments were inappropriate. You thank Lara Spencer for her professionalism and express hope that the focus can return to the charitable work. Option 2. You double down, defend your position, and prepare for this to define you for a very long time." There was a long silence. The assistant stopped pacing. Everyone in the room was waiting to see which version of the prince would emerge from this disaster, the one who could admit fault and attempt to repair the damage, or the one who would let pride destroy whatever goodwill he had left. "I'm not apologizing," he finally said. But his voice lacked conviction now. It was more of a reflex than a real stance. "Then you need to understand what that means," the publicist said firmly. "It means every interview from this point forward will start with questions about this incident. It means your charitable work will be overshadowed by a reputation for arrogance. It means the narrative becomes about you being out of touch and disrespectful, not about the causes you claim to care about." The weight of those words settled over the room, because they were true. This wasn't going away. The video wouldn't disappear, and every journalist, every talk show host, every person he encountered in professional settings would remember this moment. They'd remember how he spoke to Lara Spencer, how he dismissed the audience, how he couldn't handle the slightest pushback without melting down. Back in the studio, the show was wrapping up for the day. Lara had made it through the remaining segments with grace and professionalism. But now that the cameras were off, she allowed herself to feel the full impact of what had occurred. Her coworkers surrounded her with support, offering words of encouragement and admiration. "You're trending #1. Someone called out, showing their phone screen. And not in a bad way. "People are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero," Lara said, shaking her head. "I just didn't let someone be rude on my show. That shouldn't be heroic. That should be normal. But that's exactly why it is heroic, Robin said. Because it's become so rare. People are so used to celebrities and public figures getting away with terrible behavior that when someone actually holds them accountable, it feels revolutionary. Lara understood what Robin meant, but it also made her sad. When had the bar gotten so low that basic respect had become negotiable? When had it become acceptable for people with status to treat others as lesser? And when had standing up to that behavior become brave instead of just expected? The executive producer approached with an update. So, his team reached out. They want to know if you'd be willing to have a conversation, off camera, just to, and I quote, find a path forward. Lara raised an eyebrow. A path forward? What does that even mean? I think it means they want you to agree not to talk about this anymore in exchange for some kind of statement from him. Damage control on both sides. There's no damage to control on my side, Lara said simply. I didn't do anything wrong. I defended my show and my audience from someone who was being disrespectful. I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen or that it wasn't justified. The producer nodded. That's what I told them you'd say. So, what do you want me to tell them now? Tell them that if the prince wants to issue an apology, we'll consider covering it as news. But I'm not interested in a private conversation where we both agree to move on. This isn't about me and him. It's about the principle. And that was the truth of it. This had never been personal for Lara. She didn't dislike the prince as an individual. She didn't have some vendetta against him. But she refused to participate in the machinery that protected powerful people from consequences. She refused to be complicit in the idea that status should shield someone from accountability. The afternoon brought wave after wave of media requests. Every outlet wanted Lara's side of the story, wanted her to elaborate on the confrontation, wanted her to give them something more to work with. But she declined all of them. She'd said what needed to be said in the moment, on her show, when it mattered. Everything else was just noise. Her co-anchor George came by her dressing room as she was packing up for the day. That was something to witness, he said, leaning against the doorframe. In all my years in this business, I've never seen anything quite like that. Neither have I, Lara admitted. And honestly, I hope I never have to do it again. I don't enjoy conflict. I don't enjoy making people uncomfortable. But I also won't compromise on respect. You shouldn't have to, George agreed. And I think that's what people are responding to. They're tired of watching powerful people act however they want without consequences. They're tired of politeness being used as a weapon against people who are just trying to do their jobs. You showed them that it doesn't have to be that way. Lara smiled, grateful for the support. I just hope the message gets through. Not just about today, but about how we treat each other in general. Titles don't make you better than anyone else. Money doesn't make you more important. What makes you valuable is how you treat the people around you, especially the people who can't do anything for you. That philosophy, so simple and yet so powerful, was what had guided Lara throughout her career. It was why crew members loved working with her. It was why guests usually left their interviews feeling heard and respected. It was why audiences trusted her. She practiced what she preached, and that authenticity was impossible to fake. Meanwhile, the prince's team was in full crisis mode. The initial statement they drafted, full of vague language about misunderstandings and unfortunate tensions, had been rejected by their client. He still wasn't ready to admit wrongdoing. But the longer they waited, the worse the optics became. Silence was starting to look like stubbornness, and stubbornness was reinforcing every negative perception people already had. His publicist tried one more time. Sir, I understand you feel justified in your reactions, but perception is reality in this business. And right now, the perception is that you're arrogant and dismissive, that you think you're above common courtesy. Is that really how you want to be seen? Of course not, the prince snapped. But I'm not going to grovel to a morning show host just to make some people on the internet happy. It's not about groveling, the assistant chimed in, finding courage. It's about acknowledging that you could have handled things better. That's all. Just admit that your frustration got the better of you and that you didn't mean to be disrespectful. It's not that complicated, but it was complicated, at least for him. Because admitting fault meant acknowledging that he wasn't always right. It meant accepting that his perspective wasn't the only valid one. It meant recognizing that Lara Spencer, a morning show host who reads off a teleprompter, had been more professional, more gracious, and more dignified than he had been. And that pill was apparently too bitter to swallow. Hours passed. The news cycle continued, with commentary and analysis filling every available space. Etiquette experts weighed in on who was right and who was wrong. Media critics discussed the power dynamics of live television. Regular people shared their own stories of dealing with entitled behavior in their workplaces and communities. The conversation had expanded far beyond one bad interview. It had become a cultural moment, a touchstone for broader discussions about respect, privilege, and accountability. And through it all, Lara Spencer went about her evening like normal. She went home, she had dinner with her family, she answered some texts from friends checking in on her. She didn't obsess over the social media response or the news coverage. She'd done what needed to be done. And now she was moving forward. That was her nature. Address the problem directly, stand firm in your principles, and then let it go. But the story wasn't letting her go. By the next morning, it had somehow gotten even bigger. Major newspapers were running front-page stories. International outlets were covering it. Late-night hosts were doing entire segments about the incident, with most of them siding firmly with Lara. The prince had become a punchline, the embodiment of everything people found frustrating about entitled celebrities. Good Morning America's ratings for that episode had been through the roof, with millions more viewers tuning in than usual, many of them just to see the now infamous confrontation. The show's social media following had exploded overnight, and Lara had received thousands of messages from people thanking her for standing up, for showing them that it was okay to set boundaries, for demonstrating that respect should never be optional. When she arrived at the studio for the next day's show, there was a different energy in the air. The crew greeted her with applause as she walked through. Audience members who were there for that morning's taping asked for photos with her, telling her she'd inspired them. It was overwhelming and humbling all at once. But Lara didn't want to be defined by this moment. She didn't want to become the host who kicked off a prince. She wanted to be known for the thousands of other interviews she'd done well, for the stories she'd told with care, for the joy and information she'd brought to viewers over the years. One incident, no matter how dramatic, shouldn't overshadow an entire career. So when the show went live that morning, she addressed it briefly and then moved on. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for the incredible support over the past 24 hours. It's been overwhelming in the best way. But I also want to say this. Yesterday was about one moment, one interaction. Today is about getting back to what we do best, bringing you great stories, interesting conversations, and hopefully some laughs along the way. So let's do that. The audience applauded, appreciating both the acknowledgement and the desire to move forward. And the show proceeded beautifully, with engaging segments and warm interviews that reminded everyone why Good Morning America had been successful for so long. Lara was in her element, making guests feel comfortable, asking insightful questions, connecting with the audience in that genuine way that had always been her strength. In a hotel room across town, the prince watched the show on his laptop. He saw the applause Lara received. He saw how seamlessly she'd moved past the incident. He saw the respect and admiration in people's eyes when they looked at her. And for the first time since the confrontation, he felt something other than anger or defensiveness. He felt regret, not regret that he'd been called out, but regret that he behaved in a way that deserved calling out. Regret that he'd let his ego override his values. Regret that he'd proven every criticism people had about him being out of touch and entitled. The mirror being held up to him wasn't flattering, and he couldn't blame the mirror for that. His publicist entered the room quietly. We need a decision. Today, right now. Are we apologizing or not? The prince watched Lara on screen for another moment, saw her laughing with a guest, saw the genuine warmth she radiated. Then he closed the laptop and turned to face his team. Draft an apology, a real one. No excuses, no justifications. Just an acknowledgement that I was wrong and that Lara Spencer handled a difficult situation with far more grace than I did. The publicist looked genuinely surprised. Are you sure? Once we release it, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. The prince took a breath. I went on that show to talk about mental health and kindness, and then I demonstrated neither of those things. The hypocrisy is embarrassing. So yes, draft the apology. Make it clear that this was my failure, not hers. Within an hour, the statement was released. It was straightforward and honest, taking full responsibility without trying to shift blame or make excuses. It acknowledged that Lara Spencer had been professional throughout and that the confrontation was entirely due to his own behavior. It thanked her for her patience and apologized to the audience for wasting their time with personal drama instead of focusing on important issues.